G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. Today we are talking about some pods. And no, I don't mean podcasts. We're talking points of difference. Let's go.
Just done it from nowhere. Hoisted the goal from inside the circle. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Round Petty. Petrarca. Oh, wow. How good is that? The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey. You can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy and joined once again with my mate Luke. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm good. I actually realised the other day you always ask me how I am, but I never get a chance to see how you're going.
Mate,
so how are you going?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very well.
That's
We're
right.
getting closer to the season to starting,
We are.
and we're getting some more news coming up, lots of track watching going on at the moment. So yeah, it's getting close and it feels a bit more real. So lots of exciting things for us to talk about on the podcast today.
Definitely.
Breaking into some points of difference. Now, I've said before on the podcast that one of the rules is that, not rule, I guess, but the things that some people can get carried away with is the ownership numbers,
Yep.
especially in the preseason. So I want to put a little asterisk next to this podcast by saying that points of difference are great, and if you could pick someone that are lowly owned and they really go off, it can set you up for a great season. But we're not always looking for a point of difference just for the sake of them being a point of difference. So the guys that we're going to talk about today, we've got 15 players that we're going to discuss.
Yep.
I think that all of them have a legitimate reasoning to be in your side regardless of their ownership percentage. But these guys just happen to be lowly owned. We cut off at 10%, so all these guys are under 10% owned as of the 4th of February.
Yep.
So, just keep that in mind that, there might be some that we haven't left off this list, but that's because we don't necessarily believe in them as an actual pick, and just because they are lowly owned, it doesn't mean that I think you should be going and looking for them.
Yeah, and just to add to that point as well, Mitch, we're going to talk about 15 players, but please don't go and select all 15 players in your team.
Yeah.
And some of these, you guys will kind of get a bit of a gauge on our tone as well, but some of these players we're very, very keen on, and some of these players we're just going to talk about because we've definitely seen their names out there as well. So
I think you only really need, you don't probably need any, to be honest, but I think, like I said, don't pick someone just because they're lowly owned, but sometimes it can be a nice bonus to start the season with. So
definitely.
Starting, we're going to start from the most owned, work our way down to the most unique, the most lowly owned position of all these guys. So on the top of the list here, we're talking about the Irishman, Connor McKenna for the Brisbane Lions. He was last featured on my team in the team reveal as a cheap defender.
A bit of a surprise for me at that point as well.
Yeah, 370,000. He went back, I think it was COVID, persuaded. He went back to Ireland,
Yes,
and he's back now, so hasn't played footy in a little while, or at least in the AFL, so he comes in at a decent discount, where he's done, I think, close to 70 in the past. So price at about, what would he be priced at? 370k, 45 points. So
yeah, it's hard to see you kind of losing on McKenna. It's just how much you'll win, I think, is the thing to discuss. He's the kind of player that you see a team like Brisbane who haven't been able to get over that premiership hump. He's the kind of guy that you bring in. He's got a little bit of experience. Okay, he's obviously, I'm not quite sure what his age is, but he's not super young.
I think he might be
imagine.
around 27.
Yeah, so he's kind of right. He's right in that that mould of coming in to hopefully for the Lions build into a premiership team. The other thing too that I see is him playing across half-back, and I saw a few tweets that got around. I think the Lions had some match sim.
Yep.
Was it yesterday or the other day? Said that he was looking good. He was getting his hands on the footy across half-back. So my real point with McKenna is I just don't think you can lose on him. But if you're picking him, you want to win big, don't you?
Yes, yeah. You want to have that decent upside. Now, I guess a player like this is very much, in my opinion, dictated by the rookies available for us in the defensive line.
That's a good point.
And so far, it looks like that might be a line where we are struggling for some decent rookie options. So, say for example, there's a situation where there's only sort of 3 or 4 rookie price players that present themselves to us, then instead of having 2 rookies on your field, you might elect to have 1 rookie as your D6 and then Connor McKenna as your D5, who you're paying up a little bit more, but probably still has the kind of upside of a rookie in terms of his price versus his projected average. I sort of still see him going like that 65 to 70 kind of a range.
Yeah.
The other question, I guess, for Connor McKenna is, is he locked into that best 22? And if you're paying that kind of a price different to a rookie, you'd absolutely want him to be.
Yeah.
And some say that he is, some say he isn't. I'm not too sure myself.
His job security, for me, is so interesting because if you look at that Brisbane defence over the last couple of years, there's a few big names in there. So we're talking Rich, we're talking Zorko occasionally, we're talking even up-and-coming guys like Kitty Coleman. I think they're going to be wanting to play in that role. So, for me, the job security one is a really interesting one. It's something that we'll have to keep an eye on over the preseason, and we'll get a vibe from listening to press conferences and reading articles just how highly the Lions rate him and whether they see him as being a part of their big premiership build. And if he is, then he's a guy that you seriously consider. But like you said, if you're going to pay, what was it, $370, and then suddenly he gets dropped after a couple of rounds, you're really kicking yourself. You could have just gone a rookie.
Yeah, I think if the way I'm seeing it, if there are the rookies available there and we feel at least somewhat confident in them, I'm more elected to go that way.
Yeah.
And save just maybe that $150,000.
Spend it somewhere else.
If he's kind of a player that I am keeping in the back of my mind, that if there is that shortage, that he might be one of the guys that we kind of forced to go in that direction.
Yep.
By no means do I think he's going to absolutely take the game away from you if you don't pick him, or catapult you up the rankings if you do pick him. But he's just kind of a name that don't forget about him.
Yeah.
He is there. He is decent enough value, but like we sort of said, I think he is very dictated by the rookie availability, especially in that defensive line, which, fingers crossed we have a few bolters as we get closer to the preseason games. And
Noah Bolters.
Noah Bolters, yeah, our man. He is someone there, 8% owned in fantasy right now. The next guy here,
also at 8%, is the Bont.
Marcus Bontempelli.
I think you're a little higher on the Bont than I am. So
I'm pretty keen on the Bont this year.
If you want to lead us off.
Yeah, I just think, first of all, he's a player that I've always sort of picked him as a guy that by the end of his career, if he hasn't won a Brownlow, either we've stuffed up along the voting system somewhere, or I don't know, he's been unlucky with injuries or something like that. Because Marcus Bontempelli, he's obviously one of the best players in the competition.
Yep, no doubt.
In fantasy sense, he's always been a guy that kind of is a bit better in real life footy than he is in fantasy. Shines very much in like a Supercoach format, but he has had stretches in fantasy where he's gone, second half of the season averaging over 120. He's gone for stretches, where he's done close to that 110 mark. And he's a guy that, with the departure of Dunkley, I see him getting more of that inside mid role. He's a guy that last year was carrying a few little niggles. I think he even missed a game for management midway through the season. And then when he came back after the bye, seemed much more himself, saw the centre bounces increase, and he did put on a stretch after the bye going 108. Yeah. He's priced at 100. So if he can get close to that 110 mark, that puts him right around that sort of lump of players like the M12s to M87s. And I think that he represents pretty decent value at that point. A lot of people might be going McRae. We obviously are keen also on Bailey Smith, who we might touch on later. But Bontempelli is someone that also, I think, presents a lot of value this year. And he's definitely in consideration with my team.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, I'm probably a little less high on the Bont, and there's just kind of a couple of reasons that I'm playing with, so I want to kind of run and by you as well. So last year, he was an obvious selection because he had that DPP. He was a forward. He was always going to be a top 6 forward in his average. Yep. So my question kind of to you here is, you said you think he might go around that 108 to 110 mark. If you're picking Bontempelli, are you picking him at the start of the season because you think he's going to be a top 8 midfielder? Because if he goes at 108, he's probably...
I think 108's good enough. In terms of the blanket, after the first maybe 3 or 4 midfielders, so last year we had Robbie Laird at 120. The next best, I believe, was Oliver at 114 or 113 or something like that. Brayshaw might have been a 112. But then you're back at 110, 108. There's a big clump of players in that sort of range. And the way I see footy going, and this is may or may not be correct, with more and more teams electing to play at a faster pace and move the ball on that Richmond game style, gaining popularity, I think that 110 is kind of that's your top 8 benchmark in my opinion.
You're not going to have those ridiculous.
You don't need to aim for
year.
115 or anything like that. Like 110 gets it done for me. That's someone that I'm happy to be a keeper. And I think that So I'm not. And again, we get so stressed about top 8, but really I sort of view it as like, if you can score X, if you can score this much, then I'm happy with that. So for me, especially in the first part of the season, if you can go over 105 as a midfielder, I mean, depending on when you're priced at, I think that's a quote-unquote keeper.
Okay.
With the back end of the season, your opportunity to do those luxury trades and get to the top. You do want to maybe keep a spot open for those top 4 mids, so those guys that can be those 115s.
Yeah.
But that, 5 to 15 range of the midfield is a huge blanket.
That's true. You'd be doing extremely well to have locked in the top 8 midfielders by,
most of the
end of
times,
the year.
So you're not all the top 8.
So let me play devil's advocate on another point that you made as well, and a lot of people will agree. So Dunkley departs, he goes to Brisbane, and we kind of go, okay, Bont gets more mid-time. Devil's advocate, Bont's in that mould of your Dustin Martins, your Petrarcas, those guys that we see, explode out of stoppage and then go forward, spend time forward because they are so dangerous. I don't think anyone would argue that Bont's not an elite forward in the competition as well. Do you see that as being impactful? That
is the risk with him, and that's why I sort of has said before, like, he's a better football player than he is an AFL fantasy player because he is so good. Obviously, the opposite teams are tagging him, putting attention into him, and in the past, the counter for that for Bevo is, okay, let's send him forward.
Yep.
The tag will be less effective there, and that's still definitely a risk.
Yep.
And that's why, if you compare him across the formats with him and a Supercoach, and Supercoach is a 120 plus guy, at his best. Fantasy, he's probably more that 108, 110. So I still think that in the time that he is in the centre, he's good enough to make up for that. It is obviously a risk, and that's why he's sort of not a 100% lock, and maybe not, that's probably why he is 8% owned in fantasy. So I guess it's something to watch in the preseason. Is he, last year, if I pull up, was he something like 50 or 60% CBAs?
Yeah.
If he does get back up to like 70 to 80%, like a Patrick Cripps of last season, then he is someone that I think that can go
from memory,
really, really big.
His CBAs when he was down at 50 to 60 last year, but
58%. I've got it in front of me.
The previous 2 years, is that right? 70 odd the previous 2 years.
I'll check last year, 2021, he was 73.
Yeah, so look, I agree.
That year he averaged 108, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so if he goes up into those high 70s, 80s CBA numbers, then he's a guy that you definitely should be looking at. Yeah, it's always good to, and the reason I play devil's advocate is it's always good to kind of hear both sides. I think sometimes you can get stuck in your drinking the Kool-Aid. It's like you said, that echo chamber as well.
Yeah.
So we always kind of like to bounce those differing opinions.
Yeah, he's kind of those guys that, like, in my team and my structure, he's very in and out. He's not someone that stays on my side. So he's a guy that I see value in, but it's not a guy that I see like just so much value that he has to be in my team.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I think that a lot of people might view him similarly. So, comparing to another player that we'll touch on later, I think he is a similar kind of a guy to someone like a Josh Kelly in that kind of an instance, similar price point. Let's move on to the next player. Chad. The hanging Warner. Chad Warner.
What is that?
Chad Warner, 8% owned again. He is in that kind of, there's a few players clumped in there, those younger breakout kind of midfielders that
people are definitely drinking the Kool-Aid on Chad.
Yeah, but a guy that we won't talk about in this podcast because he is higher owned, Tom Green, is kind of another player that kind of you lump into his grouping as well. Another guy that we'll talk about next is also in this kind of a group. So that I think he's going into his 3rd season, so he's already shown great promise. He looks like a jet of a football player.
He does, and I think people see there was a distinct move with Sydney. It was sort of around 6 or around 7 last year where Mills got a little bit less mid-time, and it seemed as though Warner was kind of their CBA. And when I say mid-time, I'm talking CBA. So when Warner got
round 10, he got 71%, and after that,
and it coincided with Mills' dip. So that kind of, like I think I spoke on a previous podcast, that shows Sydney's intent as Warner being that game breaker, that explosive guy from CBAs. And I think we'd all agree that he is more that than Mills in a lot of ways. So Sydney kind of adopting that similar notion to a lot of teams where it's like we need guys who can rip the game apart from a CBA. And that kind of showed in their intent. So, look, I can see Chad Warner having a really great season, and it could even be a breakout season. But right now, he hasn't trained with the boys. It's just he hasn't been in the team. I don't know.
He's one of those guys, and it's always a tough one with fantasy. So there's a few different ways you can find value, right? You can find value in a guy that's discounted based on what they've done in the past, like, say, for example, a Jack McRae. He's obviously had history, and he's finds himself at a cheaper price point. Or you can pick those guys that are on the right trajectory, and try to pick a breakout. Now, historically, those are the harder ones to pick because obviously we've not seen them do it before for the stretch of the season. They're younger, their body's still, getting stronger and all that sort of thing. So to me, it's kind of one of those ones that it's a bit riskier. At least you don't have that safety net to fall back on like he's done it before.
Has Chad Warner spent any time at Mitchmond? Or
he hasn't as of yet. He's a name that I've got, the little star in the fantasy format. He's on the watch list, but he's never actually cracked the main training group. He's kind of he's in the twos right now.
He's in the Scoobies.
So but he is someone that I know a lot of people are keen on. Definitely. I just think that based on what he showed us last year, even though he did see an increase in those CBAs, the scoring didn't actually follow as much as I would have liked it to.
Yeah, there was still some inconsistency there, wasn't there? Even though the CBAs were consistent,
that's
the scoring was still a little inconsistent, and that can be an age thing. Like that can. I mean, he's been essentially thrown into that role mid-season as well. Remember, so you're saying to a player round 6, okay, now you're going to be a really high CBA guy. So if that's the way Sydney keep going, then it means that he's going to have spent this whole pre-season going, I'm a 70 to 80% CBA midfielder.
Yeah.
So, you could see that. For some reason, I just can't hit the select button on him.
Yeah, so just to reference that stat that I was talking about before, averaged 48% CBAs in the first 8 games, and in that time he averaged 90. After round 10, when he started to move more into the midfield, averaged 72% CBA. So that's a big jump. That's 24% increase in his CBAs. And he averaged 88. So he actually lost 2 points in a higher CBA role.
That's intriguing. It's a good stat.
Like that. So for that reason, it's hard for me. I think he'll be better. I think he will be improved just through natural growth. It's his 3rd year and things like that. But when I haven't seen the evidence that an increase in his CBA correlates with more points, it's just hard for me to go out on a limb and select him when I've got other options that I think I feel more confident in. But if you do, like if you just, the eye test or whatever and comes out smashing the preseason, then he is a pick that I think, even if I don't go with him, he could be a guy that really takes the season away.
That's why he's on our list, isn't it?
So yeah.
Yeah, the next... the next couple of guys we're going to talk about, I might not get a word in. I think this table might actually start levitating because these next 2 boys, Mitch is very high.
Yeah, we're going to listen without any hands here.
The old no hands trick.
Yeah, we've got to run
I'll hang on to my laptop,
a few guys here. So starting off with a guy, and I think
I'll sit back.
The next 3 players are actually all in my side right now. So Luke Davies-Uniacke is a guy that, contrast to a Chad Warner, is a guy that when we did see the CBA's increase, and he is obviously, I think he's going to his 5th or 4th season. Still a young player though, but when he did get an increase in CBA's in the second half of the year, we did see that correlate with an increase in scoring. So again, to reference the stats, averaged 82% for the season, but in the first few rounds, that was closer to sort of 50-60%. After that, after he went 82% after the buys, and in that time, averaged 106 points. He also has an injured score in round 2, bringing his price down. So if you take that one out, he would have averaged 97 on the season. So I think he's pretty much a lock to me to be 100 guy.
Yeah.
With I think that he has a likely potential to be higher than 105, which to me, when you price at 93, is a good selection. The only risk is that because he was so good at the end of last year, perhaps he is now a bit of a tag target over like a Jai Simpkin. But again, I would argue that, are you really tagging North Melbourne?
And
that's my point.
So he's going into his 6th year, and he's got a high ceiling as well. So he hit a 145 last year, which is not many guys can go that high. The thing you said, are you really tagging a guy from North Melbourne? The thing, I see some improvement in North Melbourne. I think the minute you get a coach in, like Clarko as well, there's a bit of an aura. I think I've kind of mentioned this. There's a bit
and
of
the
an
whole
aura.
team gets a bit more confident.
That's it. So I think that he's going to instill some of that confidence in some of these gun mids. So LDU has been in and out of the Oxlongs. In and out of the Oxlongs. You can't say that. But yeah, not as high as you, but there's definitely a chance that I'm picking LDU as well.
Yeah, so like you referenced, like that high ceiling, he's had, had that 145, but he's also had, three games over 120, a lot of them close to 130, several tons throughout the season. And like you said, when the team has nowhere to go but up, a lot of those floor games, I also find have the ability to just be a little bit higher if your team possesses the footy a bit more. Yeah. I think in times past, Clarko does like to maybe not like just chip around, but at least control a little bit of that possession, not waste the footy. So I think that can be good news for his kind of a scoring.
That'll be less so this year, I think, but
probably less so than the past. But again, when you're starting from a floor of North Melbourne of 2022,
the only way is up.
The only way you can go is up. So
11 tons, 4 of those 120s. So
yeah. So I think that's a pretty good stat, and I'm pretty keen on him. I also think he's just from watching. I've actually gone back and watched a few North Melbourne games, at least those little KO minis.
You tell me you went back and watched North Melbourne games in the off season.
Hell yeah! When it's 37 degrees outside, I can sit in the aircon.
Well, I'm glad you didn't invite me over, mate.
Would have put you to sleep. But no, he's a genuine, really good player, and I think he
passes the eye test too.
There's no one really threatening his CBA percentage. Jason Horne-Francis is out. We don't know what's going on with Taron Thomas. Cunnington's sort of coming back in, but I don't expect him to come in.
That's
there.
Not going to lower.
Greenwood, Hugh Greenwood. I don't see him he might be sort of starting to go on the outer. So it's him and Simpkin, and then the rest I kind of see just filling up the gaps there. So I do like LDU as a pick. Next guy here,
also
again,
7%.
7%, Dylan Moore. You referenced him as my love child in the past.
I did. Watch out.
I've obviously talked about him a lot, so I'll throw it back over to you with all of my gushing over Dylan Moore. Where do you sort of level it out? Where do you sort of sit on him as a player that I think the team you tweeted out before didn't have him in your side?
Yeah, but then I think when I spoke on the podcast, I might have had him, so there were some changes.
Yes.
There were some changes.
He's in and out of your side?
He's in and out, and it's worth referencing at this point the amount of good kind of forward options that we have to select there. I think you could do a number of different combinations and still be happy with your team in the forward line.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of referencing guys, Taranto, Cornelio.
And that's probably why he is sort of 7% and a bit more unique owned, because you do have your Connor Roses, your Cornelios, your Tarantos, your Dunkleys. There's a lot of good options, and they're obviously getting the bulk of the ownership.
Exactly. And you mentioned that just typically as a rule, people seem to feel safer picking a guy who they know has done it before. So when I go back through Cornelio's stats, there's something comforting about what he's done before, whereas you mentioned just before that it's harder to pick that guy on the trajectory. And Dylan Moore is potentially on that trajectory. Now, I'd argue that picking the guy on the trajectory can be even more rewarding because less people want to risk that.
The ceiling is unknown. He could be. It would not surprise me at all if he comes out and he is 110 averaging kind of a player. That is genuinely in the realm of possibility.
Do you think Dylan Moore...
I don't know if I'd say that he is, but that's a possibility.
Do you think as a fantasy selection, Dylan Moore suffers from the team he plays for and then a little bit of his stature and the way he scores? Do you know what I mean? I'm just talking about percentage ownership. If I say to people, Stephen Cornelio, Dylan Moore, most people know the name Cornelio. They're familiar with it. Do you know what I mean? Do you think he suffers a little bit from that? Or
I do think so in terms of people's mind, and I think so. The biggest thing, the Hawks thing, is a genuine concern. I don't think they're going to be very good, and it's hard to be a 105 average player in a bottom 2 side. I think I saw some stats. I think DC Caterpillar's right up on DT Talk. It was a really good article that I read that there's only been, I think, 8 players in the last several years that have been averaging over 100, and I think 6 of them were defenders, because in those sides, obviously, the ball's down their end a lot more. So, look, he does have an uphill battle in terms of being in what we expect to be a bottom sort of 2-3 side. And as a guy that, the other thing is that people always will bring up that he is a good forward, and sometimes, especially with a young team, you need him to play that forward role there. But I would argue that if you're picking the midfield for the Hawthorn Hawks, you're putting John Newcombe in there. He's probably your number one selected in there. Ward is probably going to get a lot of a run through there. I would then argue that Dylan Moore is the next guy that I put into that midfield. I know a lot of people, would reference Warple. They reference Mackenzie, who they've drafted this year. They reference, who was the other? McDonald that needs to go through there. I think that those guys are more like your sort of 30 to 40%, maybe a bit time on the wing. Carl Amon is another guy that maybe gets a mention. I think most recent news I've seen is he will be doing a similar role to what he did in Port. So that's more of that wing time. Yeah. So for me, he's kind of like third in that pecking order as it stands right now. Now, if it comes out in the preseason and he is, sort of forward first, midfielder second, then as high as I am on him, it might be a little bit too risky when you do have those other great options to go towards.
That's one thing that I can see happening as well is you're a coach, you look at the magnets and you say, okay, we've got these guys who can play midfield. There's too many guys that can play midfield, so we need one of these guys to play forward. And you look at some of those other names you mentioned, you think, they probably can't play forward, whereas Moore has proven that he can play forward and play it well too. So could he be a victim of that as well, that he's played forward and he's done that pretty well, and he's able to be that pressure guy down there. He works hard, he tackles. That could be something that he suffers from as well. I think, what percentage do you sort of think of Dylan Moore in terms of how likely he is to start in your team this year?
I say he's about 55-45. Okay. So by no means is he locked into my side, but 55% I think he's in my team. Yeah. Just because the way that I predict them to come out, I do think that he's going to be that 50 to 60% CBA guy. Yeah. I think that what we saw last year in that role, he is a future midfielder for this Hawthorn team, and I would be prioritising him over a Warple. I would be prioritising getting midfield minutes in ahead of a McDonald. Ward, Newcombe are probably in there as well, but those are the three with Moore that I think they're going to be trying to get a lot of midfield minutes in there together. He's old enough that he's going to be ready to get in there. He's not going to be bullied as a younger player. Yeah. So I think that his time is now ahead of maybe those Wards and McDonald's and that sort of a thing. There's a lot of talk about him being a potential part of the leadership group, captaincy of this squad, along with like a Sicily. So I think that kind of a presence in the midfield with a lot of other younger guys, even though he's 22, like he's not 30 years old or anything like that. So he's the future of their club, but he's also mature enough and old enough that he can spend an entire season in the midfield and not worry about his body. So there's a lot of things ticking there, but again, I'm not the coach, so I have to sort of go out and see what happens in the preseason. So if the evidence is maybe going the other way, then I have to, as much as I like the guy, I can't. I'm conscious of not kind of, because I was very big on Heaney last year. I sort of thought, okay, he's going to be in there. I think I didn't start with him, but then traded into him round one because I thought, this guy's just good. You have to have him in the midfield, but when the signs are there that he's not going to be there, you've kind of got to, no matter what you think, read those signs and listen to that. So same kind of thing for me with Moore, but still a genuine option. Okay, all right, let's move on to the other forward. To, again, same percent ownership, Zach Butters. Another guy that...
I prefer margarine, I'll be honest.
That was a good one, actually. I didn't mind that at all. I have to think about that for a second.
Look, I think the scenario, for me, I don't know if it's just like a neatness thing, but the scenario where you go Butters is like you don't go Rosie and you go Butters is like a little bit of a point of difference there. I don't know...
Couldn't have both?
I don't think I'd feel good about it, but maybe I'm jaded. Like, Rosie burnt me. I had Butters for a little bit. He didn't really set the world on fire. Yeah. There's some injuries there.
So you started last year without Butters, started with Rosie.
Traded in
Butters, and then he goes to shit. Rosie went off. So that's tough.
It was up and down for the Oxongs, you could say.
Yeah. So that's, look... Part of me... Butters I find really tricky to get a read on. on the one side, you see the potential. You see, like, compared to someone like a Rosie, if we're just going to compare him to his teammate here.
Yeah.
When you look at the CBAs, he obviously had fewer CBAs than a Rosie, if I just pull up their stats right now. So Rosie had 50% of the season, Butters had 38%. But obviously, after that round 6 game, or round 5 game, I should say, Rosie went right up into sort of the mid-60s.
Yeah.
Butters sort of always floated around that 30 to 40 range, and nearly scored as well as Rosie did when you look back at the entire season in a fewer CBA roles. So you kind of then think, okay, well, if he does get the same amount of CBAs as a Rosie, maybe his ceiling is higher. Then a Connor Rosie, he's probably lower in the pecking order in terms of a tag.
Yeah.
You're probably tagging someone like a Wines or a Rosie ahead of a Zach Butters at this stage. So, I don't know. There's still something to be said about Zach Butters. He just, I don't know, the confidence in that happening, it's tough.
Yeah,
again.
I was going to say, I don't think I'm ballsy enough to select Butters, and the only reason why Rosie's been back in my team this year is because there's the safety net of him being highly owned. So
yeah. And I think his value,
he is. Yeah. If Rosie was more lowly owned, I think I'd be a little bit more nervous about it. I know there's just a bit of a safety thing in me there with the fact that a few more people are on board with him. I just don't think I'm ballsy enough to select Butters.
Yeah, there's something again, he's kind of and again, it depends on your structure. Are you having 3 or 4 premium forwards to start off with? I'm pretty sold on a Dunkley and a Taranto as my F1 and F2. Yeah. That 3rd and 4th spot are very much up for debate with me. Maybe you do go unique and get a Moore and a Butters in there, or you sort of side with a Cornelio, Rosie sort of train in terms of confidence, or you've got one other guy and you just pick one other guy and you have 3 premium forwards and do it that way. So I think it's the forward line as much as it seems like a easy one to select a lot of the guys. There's so many good options that to find the best option is actually quite challenging to me. But, we've seen a ceiling with him. He averaged 107 in the last 5 games. Yeah. Came out, had a ceiling score of 137. So he's got big ceiling about him. And only had 1 game last year where he cleared 60% CBAs in round 7. Yeah, there's still something alluring to me about Zach Butters, and if you're picking him, all the power to you. I think it could be a great selection.
But you can hear in our tone of voice that there's just no confidence about it, is there?
Yeah, but he's definitely still under consideration, but I want to see what it looks like in the preseason and see how his body looks and go from there.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the next player here, who I'm going to go on a limb here. I think that of everyone on this list, he is the guy that I'm most confident in.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see, unless something changes with an injury or something like that, I don't necessarily see a world where I don't start with Bailey Smith.
Yeah, so you're not scared off at all by the kind of managed load at training. I don't think I am either.
I think that's getting blown out of proportion. I see a lot of people sort of labeling him. Yep, interrupted preseason. Yep, he's come in and look. It's February 4. He's had an interrupted preseason because they've been managing his load. He's been at every training session. He missed maybe a couple of match sims early just because.
I reckon he would have been at the social events.
Yeah, he's probably he's getting around the boys.
He's probably best on ground at the social events.
So I'm not at all writing him off with that. If there is a legitimate injury that pops up, then I start to sort of change my mind. But what I've seen so far and how I've read between the lines, that's not a worry for me. Yeah. He's a kind of guy. Again, I called it early. He's sort of, to me, has the potential to be the Brayshaw of this season. Just that young, we're not coming out, and it's not a bold claim to say that Bailey Smith is a great footballer. He's proven already that he's an excellent talent.
And even the fact that we talked about picking a guy on trajectory before, and Smith kind of constitutes that. But if you go back and have a look at what he did in the first period of last season, he showed he's got an enormous ceiling. And we talk about guys that just love finding the football.
Yeah.
Go watch him play football.
You can see it when he plays. He plays so hard.
He just hunts it. He is willing and able to play high time on ground when he's fit. And I think if I was Bailey Smith, there'd be a little bit of a chip on my shoulder this year as well.
I was thinking that this morning before we started recording as well. If you're Bailey Smith, you're kind of thinking, I know how good I am as a footballer, but none of the chatter is about how good he is at football. All the chatter is about him and obviously the suspension he had last year and the off-field sort of stuff. And look, maybe rightfully so, but if like that to me can be used as like a little bit of extra internal motivation, and coming out from the get-go, from the start of the season, that first bounce, that first game, with a point to prove on a team where he maybe is overshadowed by a Bontempelli, a McRae. But being the youngest of those kind of guys, we've already seen stretches of him being the number one ranked fantasy player. Dunkley's gone. So there's so many ticks to me that make him an excellent selection. I'm still obviously keeping an eye on him, and I don't like to use the word lock at this stage, but to me, of everyone on this list, I'm probably the most confident with Bailey Smith, and at 6% owned, he could really distinguish yourself from other teams in the early games if he does start like he started last year.
Definitely.
There's big ceiling with a player like Bailey Smith.
No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
On to the next guy here. Your boy, I think, was in your side last we spoke. Was he in the screenshot? Again, I can't remember because you change your team so often.
Yeah, and the team could be different now. You just never know.
Josh Kelly.
Josh Kelly's a guy that I think he's shown in his history that when he gets CBAs, like, notch it down. 115, 120. If he's getting like high CBAs, so that's just going to be the question on him. The new coach, and then potentially that new game plan that we've mentioned many times.
Yep.
But look, if he gets CBAs, it's like
if you're the Giants coach, let me talk to you about it this way. If you're the Giants coach and you're coming over and you're thinking about your midfield, who's the first player you put into midfield?
Oh, look, in my opinion, I'm putting Kelly in there, and I mentioned this on a previous pod as well, because I think his stature, there's this notion he is an elite user, but there's this notion he's like, he's a flowing on the outside, he's a wingman, get the ball to him on the outside and he'll use it.
Yeah.
Like, don't sleep on Josh Kelly as an inside mid. Because
I 100% agree.
The guy's electric in there as well. Don't be fooled by those skinny pipe cleaner arms. Like, he is an absolute gun no matter where he plays on the field. So for me, I'd be picking him in the CBAs, and then I'd be picking him in my fantasy squad. But unfortunately, I'm not coaching the Giants.
It's the same kind of thing like I've spoken about with Dylan Moore. Like, if he has the role, then he's a gun, he's a jet, and he's a great pick.
Yeah.
And again, if I'm the coach of the team, I put him in that role, but obviously we've got to abide by what the coaches do. So for me, if I'm picking that midfield, it's Kelly. It's Green. They're my two that are in there a lot. Cogs will go in there. Yeah. Maybe you have like a Perryman or something roll in there. But
do you see Whitfield spending any time in the middle?
Not in the centre. I think he's probably better off half-back or on a wing, either or, just because of his frame, and I don't see him as much of a contested kind of a player. He looks like a winger, and he actually plays like a winger, in my opinion. Yeah. So I still think he's more of an outside kind of a player. But to me, it's Green and it's Kelly. Like they're the midfield.
Yeah, I think so
Cogs, he is in there, but again, maybe a bit older than those other two. So perhaps he's not in their next premiership winning team. Yeah, so maybe you prioritise some of the other guys. But for me, he's in there. But again, it's all about what does the coach do and how does that affect his numbers.
I'd be pretty shocked, if they trade out Taranto and Hopper, and then Kelly's midfield time doesn't increase. I'd be pretty shocked.
I would be pretty shocked too, but I've been shocked before. Look, if he is in there, let's say he goes 65%. Let's just assume that. Yeah. What do you think he does?
If he goes 65%, what did he go last year? Was it 40s?
So I think above 60% he was 110 in those kind of a game. But last year he averaged I want to say 40% CBA or 45.
If he goes 65 up to 70, I'd be locking him in at 110.
Yeah, so he was 47 last year.
Yeah, I'd be locking him in as a top 8 midfielder if he has that role.
See, I've got he and a Bontempelli because they're very closely priced. I have them neck and neck, and I have a tough time picking between Bont and Kelly. I find myself leaning towards Bont a little bit more because I feel more confident in his role than I do with Kelly, just because Kelly does seem to get moved around more than a Bont. I think the general opinion out there is Bont is that Brownlow medalist kind of a guy. Kelly, I think, has the potential to be there, but it's probably less...
Does Josh Kelly's history sway you in any way? The fact that we've seen him go 110 multiple years, we've got a 108 in there. I know we're going back 2017, 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
He's gone 113, 108, 110.
I think, kind of. But then again, if we reflect back to the changing game style, maybe like you just take a hair off those kind of numbers. Instead of that being a 115, maybe it's a 111, 112. Like... I think it's enough for me. Like I said, those two, I'm flip-flopping. And maybe you have both. Like, maybe you have both of them in there, because I think they both present sort of 8 to 10 points of upside, which puts them right in that mix of top 8 mids. You're paying only 100, paying for a price tag of 100 averaging player.
Yeah.
These, like, this kind of price range is where I really like to go shopping a lot in my fantasy teams with the midfielders.
Yeah.
Because
you like to pounce.
Yeah, I like to pounce on them there, because, like, there's no world where I see them going under 100, really.
Yeah.
And then there's a world where they're 110 top 8 mids. So
it's pretty safe with some upside.
I like both those guys, but again, I'm kind of like 51% Bont, 49% Kelly.
Yeah.
Are you maybe the other way around, or more so Kelly?
I'm more Kelly than Bont.
Yeah.
Can't explain it. Like, I don't know. There's
probably the tag factor. Like,
there could be, but like you said,
forward
when it comes down to two players where essentially you could flip a coin, that there is a little bit of gut feel that just kind of comes into it.
Yeah,
you can't help that.
Like, if someone out there was like, yep, Kelly's a gun, I love him, and he's going to be in my team, like, go for it. Like, I wouldn't talk anyone out of that at all. So I do think he is a good point of difference. Moving on to the next one here.
The only big boy on the list, I think.
Yeah, you were wanting to take him out.
Yeah,
I wanted to leave
really
him in here because
about him, but
Brody Grundy at 5% owned.
So you see him being as a point of difference if Max plays predominantly forward and Grundy takes most of the ruck. Is that your...
That's my thinking, and I'm also thinking that... I just think that we've seen Grunt... Like, he's got 120 ceiling. Obviously, I don't see him going that, but when you're paying for him priced at 90... What is he priced at? 94... I don't see a whole lot of downside there. Like, could he get... And it's more just sort of the comparison with all the other rucks. There's a lot of question marks on a lot of other rucks. You know, Darcy Cameron has had a hamstring concern, a hamstring scare, I think was the word using the other day, which I don't know what the hell that means.
There's so many like hamstring related.
It's like, words. Can we just define the injury, awareness. Please? Like, is he aware? Is he torn it?
It's
like,
easier to just fool people with buzzwords.
Like, okay, yes, I know he has a hamstring. He's scared of them, but what has he actually done? Anyway, side rant. But like, you know, there was an adductor worry about Tim English, like Errol Marshall. There's the injury. Sorry, the concern about his role and maybe spending more time forward with a couple of their forward stocks down. Grundy, like...
So what do you see his CBA percentage being for Grundy?
I think he's probably like that between 65-70%, kind of a CBA guy.
So in his huge years, like he's going 85 to 90% CBAs.
Yeah, he has. But those huge years is corresponded to 115, 120, right?
119, 123.
So he's not... I'm ruling that out, right? Okay. I'm not expecting that. But could he still be 100? Could he still be 105?
So let's say 2020,
maybe.
2021, 106 at 80% CBAs.
Yeah, like
accounted for 77% of his team's hitouts.
So, and perhaps, you know, being on a team like a Melbourne, you know, he might be going up against like the secondary ruckman a bit more than he probably was back then. You know, with Max Gawn being in the picture. I don't want to rule him out just yet. I know. Okay. I think I said in the previous podcast, you probably can't select either Max or Grundy. I don't think you can select Max because of his price tag, but Grundy, just because of the shambles that is the ruck position.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to rule him out.
So if
he can get back even to 80% of his best, that's still maybe good enough to be sort of a top 2 or 3 ruckman.
Because at the moment you've pretty much been going Marshall and Cameron. So let's say Cameron does have this injury concern and it kind of goes on and we can't select Cameron. Are you then more likely to go to Marshall Grundy or Marshall English?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. And look, I probably at this stage feel more confident with English. But again, I just wanted to bring him to everyone's awareness at a 5% ownership. It could be... Like, we've only seen English go at this kind of a pace for a smaller period of time.
Yeah.
You know, and even within that season, the concussion issues, injuries, you know.
Yeah.
It's far from like, okay, yep, now he's just 105, lock him in, that's what he is.
A lot of people are talking that way, but I'm with you.
It could be that. It could be that. But it also might not be. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not. It's far from a certainty, in my opinion.
Yep.
We know that Grundy is a gun. You know, Max Gawn has had issues already in the preseason. I think he had a hamstring scare himself. So
no one is immune.
So, like, say there's a world that maybe he's kind of like that mid-90s guy in a dual ruck setup, and then all of a sudden Gawn goes down, misses a few weeks, and he goes 110, 115. And he's clearly the number one ruck. So I don't want to rule him out just yet. I'm watching him in the preseason just with the rucks, and I think that at 5% ownership, I think he's still someone that should be on your radar without just putting a line through him.
Callum Mills, 4% owned. I don't know if I'm going there. I think I mentioned him on a previous podcast where I talked about the fact that he's a Swiss Army knife, and that, I mean, as good as that is as a football player, it's terrible as a fantasy player because it means your coach is tempted to play you in lots of different roles. I'd imagine I know his price he's quite exy.
Yeah, 111 he's priced at.
Yeah, so he scored well last year. At 4% owned, yes, it could be tempting as a point of difference, but I don't see him doing significantly better than what he did last year. And I think, for me, there's only downside. There's only opportunity for him to have low scoring
I would disagree
games.
that there's only downside. I think I am predicting it to be downside.
So in the world where you say there's upside, is it just because he gets high CBAs?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I agree with that.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong.
Okay,
if he gets high CBAs, then he could go 120.
Yeah.
But
he could be the number one scoring fantasy player in the club.
Easy. But I think it's more likely that he gets used in a versatile role. Especially, we talked about Chad Warner before. We're going to talk about a guy, Errol Gulden, next up. So, yeah, for me, I just see it going that versatile role. Callum Mills is a consummate professional, and he's not going to be sooking it up because he's not getting his CBAs. He just does what the coach requires. And that team's going to be hungry coming off a spanking in a grand final. Yeah. So he's just going to be doing every single thing
he's going to be the guy, like, the captain of the club. Like, he's going to be the guy that really takes a lot of that on his head,
Yeah, I think so. So for me, I'm not picking him. Do you have a different opinion there?
Look, he hasn't. I don't think he's ever spent any time in Mitchman at the moment. I just wanted to highlight him here because I know there's a few other, notable, well-credentialed people that have him high on their radar. I've heard a few podcasts with him being mentioned as a good point of difference because of his ceiling, which is legitimately a good point. He's got probably one of the highest ceilings out of any player in the comp. But
is it a ceiling that you're confident to put a C on?
That's the thing, though. Because each week to week, we've seen already that he does get moved role to role, and personal experience.
Well, he's the reason why that hat's sitting in front of us.
Yeah, not a different hat. So, look, maybe there's a bit of an emotional scarring there. I still think he's the perfect fantasy player in terms of his inside, his outside, he marks, he tackles.
When he's got that
he's
inside
probably
role.
not someone who gets tagged. So the fault is that he's so versatile that he gets moved around. Now, say we see an injury to a Luke Parker, or we see an injury to a Chad Warner or something like that, my mind could quickly change if I think that he is going to be going 65, 70% CBAs, because then I see him with upside. And, then you start to compare him with like a Jack Steele and someone who, even at their price tag, has the ability to go another step. But at the way it is right now, I think that the trend of him going fewer CBAs in the second half of the year is more where I see him spending a bit more time on the wing as well as inside, because some of the other players on the Sydney team can only be inside, like your Warners and your Parkers, whereas he can do both.
I feel like even though I'm not advocating for selecting him to start the year, I still, don't get it twisted, I still think he's a guy that you probably have to have in your team come the end of the year.
I think he'll be a top, or thereabouts top 8.
We both tipped him as a top 8 midfielder on a previous podcast. So, I'll be looking for a way to get him in, but just not starting.
Let's move on to another Sydney player, Errol Gulden. Might not spend too much time on here because I don't know if I feel super confident with him, but at 3% owned, we've obviously seen the high scoring pedigree. Again, third-year player.
Yeah. He's one of those guys that if you picked him, you'd be backing a trajectory.
Yeah.
There's a trajectory there in CBAs and scoring that coincides.
You would have to see a decent level of CBAs in the preseason to be confident enough to lock and load and get him in there.
Yeah,
and even then, you might want to wait a round or two to pounce on him in the first few weeks of the round.
Especially because he's a sort of mid-price forward, and
he's not super cheap. I think he's in the high 80s.
Yeah,
and
we have so many opportunities.
Yeah, so just wanted to highlight that he is 3% owned. Does have a ceiling about him. Is a young up and coming player. I really like him as a footballer, but I think for a player like him, you would absolutely need to see high CBAs in the preseason, and even then, I don't know if I trust it until after a few games in the real stuff.
Yeah.
The next guy here, Darcy Parish.
Well,
similar price tag to kind of those Bontempellis and Josh Kellys. I have them a step ahead just because I've said before I don't really like the way that Parish goes about it in terms of more just, I don't know if it's an attitude thing, but just his style of play in terms of being like an accumulator first, worrying about defense tackling second.
Yeah.
He's the kind of a guy that needs the game style to be on his terms to score
Together.
well, and I don't know
if
he's going to get that. Especially with all the chat about Essendon being, lacking in that kind of an area.
That's it. I've got some Parish scars.
Yeah, you do.
I maintain I'd be driving a Hilux if it wasn't for Darcy Parish. It's
okay, yeah, that's the difference.
It's probably a bit rich, but...
Just a little stretch.
Oh, mate, shoot for the stars. 3% owned is still not tempting enough for me to pick Parish. I think if I was picking Parish, I'd have to question, are you just picking Parish as a point of difference?
You're just picking him because he's lightly owned.
And the answer would be yes. So
look, there is a world, like we've seen obviously stretches of him going big. I just personally have more confidence in some other guys. But again, if you were someone that were keen on him regardless, there are signs to say that he is underpriced.
Yeah.
I just personally think that he's not the kind of player that I typically go for, but if you have a difference of opinions, and there is a world where I do see that working out with someone with selecting Parish. So
there's unknowns with always when a new coach comes in, there's unknowns, and it can go one or two ways.
Apparently they're playing a slower brand of footy, like a more controlled brand of footy, which...
I heard that as well, which I thought was interesting.
It's probably really good for a player like Parish, who does, seagull it up a little bit, likes to rack it up, and I don't know if he's getting tagged as well, so...
I'm not sure it's good for Essendon's chances of winning games.
I agree with that as well.
At finals, which is obviously where everyone's, eyes go. If you're trying to set up a game style that will survive at a finals level, I just don't see that.
Maybe they're just trying to get to finals. I don't know. I thought that was an interesting report there, and it'll be interesting to see how it looks in the preseason. But yes, definitely someone to note. The next guy here, I probably also like a little bit as well, maybe a bit more so than a Parish, but Jai Simpkin for the Roos again. Comparing him to a Luke Davies-Uniacke, we sort of spoke about LDU sort of taking that bigger step forward in the second half of last year, but Simpkin also took a step forward. I think averaged 103 after the bye. The question is with LDU becoming more of like that obvious guy in their midfield, does Simpkin now get released from being that tag target and be able to roam a bit more free and become that kind of like McRae in a way that he kind of just goes about his business, collects all of his possessions, does all the stuff. He's going to be in there a high percentage of CBAs. Again, same thing with LDU. Roos, only way to go is up. New coach, maybe a better game style for him. Is he someone that maybe is coming to your calculations at all? I know
he hasn't.
You're scowling a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's just something that I'd have to just be kind of having a bit of a look at it in the preseason as well. So he's... you never completely push someone out of your calculations. I think that would be irresponsible, but he's not one that I've hit the select button on.
A lot of people were onto him I'd say a lot of people, but a few people were onto him last year, expecting him to take that breakout, literally averaged the exact same from the year prior. So perhaps we were just a year early. And again, half of that, I think, was just because the Roos sucked as much as they did. I have a little bit of confidence that they're going to be a bit better this season. I don't know if they're going to be a bottom two side. I think they're not going to obviously make the finals, but there could be sort of that mid pack in that bottom 10 teams. For
me, to simplify it, you're not picking both Simpkin and LDU, and I'm going LDU.
I think you probably do have to.
Would you?
I think they're both underpriced. I think they both improve. I just think that
you're not picking both from your team.
No, I'm probably not picking both. Just because of a structure thing, I think, when you've got a player like a Tom Mitchell already around that price.
So for me, it's LDU. Simpkin had 83% CBAs.
Yeah, his role's not different. I think the only upside there is that he's obviously just getting better. The team might get better, and then perhaps he doesn't cop as many tags when he might have copped maybe just a handful throughout the season. But I think that LDU has a high ceiling to me, and when I'm trying to pick a player, that ceiling is important to me to sort of get yourself off to a good start.
Yep.
Last couple of guys here, a couple of younger players, and Isaac Cumming. I did mention him in the premium underpriced defenders, one of our first podcasts that we started with, as a guy that when I was researching, I wanted to sort of see a bigger difference between when he played with Himmelberg in defence versus Himmelberg in the forwards, and there wasn't that big difference in his average. I think there was only a 2-point separation between those two things. So if I saw a bigger separation with the news of Himmelberg being more in the forwards, I might be able to jump on him a bit more with confidence. He is a guy that, if he has the monopoly of kick-ins and a monopoly of that usage off half-back, say Whitfield's still more on a wing, Himmelberg's up forward, I can see him being close to that sort of top 6 and at 1.2% ownership. Like, that's pretty bloody unique.
Yeah,
he could be really good. Especially maybe in contrast with someone like a Dacos, who obviously is a very highly owned player. You might be able to get a bit of a jump with a player like Isaac coming at around a similar price.
Yep.
So
he still averaged 6 kick-ins last year. He did have the monopoly on it before Himmelberg went down there, and then he shared it a little bit later. But six kick-ins is still a reasonably high number.
Yep.
For a guy 90% play on percentage there. Yeah, I know he was quite high on Rare's Magic's preseason guide.
Yeah, not to give it away and not to give away his content there, but he does rate him a lot. He does rate him as a good player. So, and when a player like Selby comes out and speaks, a lot of us should be listening.
People listen.
So, look, he hasn't broken into my team much at all this preseason, but he is still on the watch list just because the defenders are a bit of a dog's breakfast in terms of I can go a lot of different ways in that back line. So he's still in calculations for me. I think for the most part, I'd have to impress. He'd have to impress me a lot in the preseason for me to go that way. Yeah. So I don't know if I'd start with him, but he is definitely on my radar. And at 1.2% owned, there is a world where I think he comes out and is an excellent point of difference for you if you do start with him. Move on to the last guy.
Josh Ward
of the Hawthorn Hawks.
Yeah, so he's also owned at 1.2%. I think I may have said it on an earlier podcast, but I wish with a couple of the rookies from last year we could just hit the reset button and say...
that would be great, wouldn't it? Starting back at 250k or whatever it was.
Have another go at your first season. Because I think there were a few things that were kind of preventing him from seeing high CBAs last year. Part of that was kind of what was going on with Tom Mitchell and that whole debacle. So if you're picking Josh Ward this year, you're picking him based on the notion that he'll play high midfield time and that Hawthorn will really look to build a midfield around him going into the future. I don't have confidence in that being a certainty just yet, and I wouldn't be picking him there.
He's just, to me, he's such an awkward price. He's priced at 71.5. What do you need him to go to be a worthy pick? Like, in my eyes, you kind of need him to go 95.
And
that's a big ask.
Yeah, for a second-year player, it is.
It's not out of the realms of possibility. He was touted as a really good scoring junior.
Yeah.
He put up a decent average. I think he averaged 89 after the buys on a 28% CBA. So we all expect that to sort of go up to sort of maybe like your 60 to 70% potentially. Yeah. So it's not out of the realms of possibility. I think he is more of that type where you don't necessarily start with him, but if he comes out the first or second week and he's putting up those big scores, you jump on him then, trade him in. I know that, again, if we reference the great man Selby, that's something that he did in the past in his winning seasons with like a Clayton Oliver. There was another name, I can't quite remember who else it was, but... he didn't start with either of those guys, but after, I think it was the second or third round, jumped on them and then was a big reason he was able to get away. So it's difficult to really predict the second-year breakouts. They don't happen often, but when they do, it can be pretty big.
Yep.
So Ward, look, he's so awkwardly priced that I don't know if I can fit him in my starting squad, but
you can't
say you pick someone like a LDU and he kind of doesn't work out in those first couple of rounds. Josh Ward goes off to a flyer. You can always drop him down, make a bit of money, pick somewhere else up. So those kind of guys, I want to see a bit more to start the season. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that kind of a strategy?
Yeah, I'm same on Ward. When you put it into that context and you say, hey, he's valued at 71, what do you need him to go? And you say 95, I just can't say with any confidence that he's going to go 95.
Yeah.
I can't even if he starts to go big early in the season, he'd have to be going obnoxiously big for me to... So, let's say he comes out in the first 3 rounds and he kind of averages 95. I still don't know whether... You know what I mean? If he comes out, he's
have to come out and go 110,
then I'd be like, okay, well, this probably just can't be something that I miss.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And again, we referenced the Hawthorn Hawks when we're talking about Dylan Moore. Ward, they're going to be a bottom sort of side. So again, it's probably harder to predict that second-year breakout on a team that will be probably losing most of their matchups. So for that reason, that's it. I think he's a pass, but definitely still on the watch list.
No doubt
for those early trades.
No doubt there'll be people out there who have a difference of opinion on all the guys that we've talked about, or guys maybe that we haven't talked about. So as we always say, please feel free to share your thoughts on Twitter, on YouTube, and we'll try and get back to you. It's always good to hear different opinions. So.
Absolutely, let us know what you think down in the comments below, guys. If you have any questions, drop them down. Give this video a big thumbs up. We're up to, I think last I checked, 350 subscribers. We're on the road to 1,000 subs. So if you guys have not subscribed, and I think about 2/3 of you guys who watch our videos are not subscribed. So even if those 2/3 people just jump in, bang, we're at that 1,000. So if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. We would really, really appreciate it. Very exciting next podcast coming up. We've got fingers crossed, if nothing changes last second, we've got a very exciting guest. He's a man of the people. Some might even call him a prince, a people's prince. So stay tuned for that one there, guys, and we'll catch you guys next time. Bye.